this week as we start to talk about naming geometric figures. Part of what we will be dealing with is dealing with lines, segments, rays, angles, planes, and circles. So part of what we're going to do is talk about how to name these figures and the correct and appropriate abbreviations that we're going to use for that to happen. So let's take a look at our first set. First of all, in dealing with something like this is going to be a line that we're going to somehow deal with. Now, they would like us in this one to go through and to name in as many ways as possible ways to name this line. Now, naming a line depends on a couple things. First of all, if you have a letter that's down here, this has to be a letter that's not associated with a point. This letter that's down here can be used to actually name this. So we could write that this is line N, and that would be an appropriate name. Any other ones that we do have to use 2 points to name them. And they have to use some kind of a symbol over the top that actually has a line. So if I choose 2 points from up here, I could choose AB, and then I would have the line over the top. If I wanted to choose 2 other points, I could have also chose AC, or I could have done BC. Now make sure, I'm trying to make my lines as well as I can here, they shouldn't extend a lot past your letters, and you should have arrows at both ends. Now, I happen to name them going in the forward direction. That's not always going to be the case. You don't have to go in this direction to name them. So I could take any of these and switch them around. So I could have written BA or CA or CB, and those would all be appropriate ways to name that. We just have to make sure that when we do this, that you are able to look at this and tell, oh yes, those are 2 points either in the forward direction or kind of backwards. You just have to have 2 points on there to name. Okay, next one. This, if we're going to name it, first of all, we're talking about this is a line segment. Oh, that's sad little writing there. There we go. Okay, so if I go now, okay, maybe I'll go back to printing here. I have to name this by using 2 points. When I use 2 points, it does have to have a line segment marking over the top. So if I did this, if I did AB, that would be one name. Or I could have done it backwards and actually did it by BA. Now they have to have that line segment mark over the top, and also it is important that you are naming them by the end points of the actual segment. Okay, now this happens to be a ray. I can tell it's a ray because it has an arrow that continues on in one direction and it has an end point. To name this, the end point has to be part of the conversation. And then you have to have a second point that happens to be on there. And then your marking is going to look like this. So if I do this, the end point is P here. So I know it has to start with P. And I have to name some other point that's on this line. So I could do PQ, or I could do PR. End point must come first. The line must point in this direction. So you have to make sure that you start with the end point. Okay, now here's an angle. To name an angle, there are a couple different ways. If there's only one angle that happens here, I can use the angle marking and actually name it by its vertex point, which would be A. If it has a number inside, this number right here is not based on the fact that this is a degree of 1. That just tells you that that's angle number 1. Otherwise, we have to name it by using 3 letters. The middle letter has to be the vertex. So if I name this BAC, that would be one setting. I could also go backwards and do CAB. The big part for us is A has to remain in the middle if it's going to be the vertex point. Okay, this one would be plane. So in dealing with a plane, most of the time you need 3 points to be able to name it. or you could name it with one letter if there's actually a letter that's naming the point, like M here. So if I name this, I could write plain M. Otherwise, if I name it with plain, I have to have 3 points that happen to be on there. So I could do A, B, C. I could also go through and make a listing of any of the other ones that are up here as long as there were 3 points in some order. I could even rearrange these and do BAC or CAB or BAC as long as there were 3 letters, and I could go through and name them all. So if I was starting with A, I would go through and do CB. I would go through and name all of them, and then go through and make sure the word plain is in front of it, but it has to have at least 3 letters. Okay, last one here. Let's talk a little bit about circles. So first of all, this point B would be considered to be the center of the circle. If I want to talk about a radius has to go from a center to a point on the circle. So if I did AB or BC, those points would set up the radius. If I did AC, that happens to be a line that goes all the way across the circle from one side to the other, goes through the center. That means that's a diameter. Now, because it goes from one side of the circle to the other, it could also be called a chord, but this happens to be one special chord that only happens once in the circle. EF is also a chord because it goes from one point to the next. Now, as we go on, using these and naming these are going to be part of what helps us develop this geometric language or vocabulary that we have.